You are listening to a special on Pacifica Radio, Kashmir, the untold story of Indian occupation. I'm Tara Dorabji. In October, I visited Indian-administered Kashmir. It's the most densely militarized land on Earth. The region is about 5 times as large as Switzerland, and there are approximately 700,000 Indian military and paramilitary in Kashmir, policing a population of 12.5 million people. Under the British partitioning of India in 1947, Kashmir joined India as a quasi-independent region. For a short time, Kashmiris enjoyed much self-rule, self-determination, and indigenous leadership. Kashmir at that time led the world in revolutionary land reform, implementing a broad redistribution of resources that created a population relatively equal in wealth. Over time, the trust between New Delhi, India, and Srinagar, Kashmir eroded, and so did the relatively independent status. With the erosion of Kashmir's autonomy came the military repression and arguably an attempted genocide. From 1989 to 2011, there have been 8,000 documented disappearances of Kashmiris and 70,000 deaths of Kashmiris resulting from the Indian occupation. Really, it's an occupation of truth. There's an intense surveillance apparatus. Before I left India, just days, U.S. reporter David Barsamian was deported for his coverage on alternative radio of Kashmir. People who actually work on the issue report face retaliation across the globe, even our own in the Bay Area, Angana Chatterjee, who has been really instrumental in uncovering the unmarked graves and releasing a report called Buried Evidence, has been retaliated against, has been banned from India, as has her husband, Richard Shapiro. And so when I went into Srinagar, I definitely, was feeling a little nervous in terms of David Barsamian just having been deported. And on my first day, the local head of surveillance came out from Srinagar to let me know that he was fully aware of my arrival. It was discreet in terms of the interaction, but definitely served its purpose. I was being watched. And what was my threat? It was really having a pen, paper, and a mic to record the stories of Kashmiris. The truth cannot be silenced. In Kashmir, I met some extraordinary activists, visionaries, amazing, amazing people. Their existence is the resistance. And I had the distinct honor of meeting with human rights activist Khurram Parvez in Srinagar, Kashmir. We'll go right now to that conversation.
Kashmir, can you hear me? Yeah. Put your hands together, ready for the struggle, ain't you? Everybody over here, renegade on the mic. The resistance anthem.
On the International People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice in Indian-administered Kashmir. Thank you so much for being with us on Pacifica Radio.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have released a groundbreaking report documenting the unmarked graves here in Kashmir, which recently prompted the government to actually go in and investigate. Can you tell us a little bit about the number of unmarked graves that the state has verified based on the research of your organization?
Basically, the report which we brought out on 2nd of December 2009, Buried Evidence, we had visited 55 villages in which we had identified 62 graveyards. And we had investigated around 2,700 graves, out of which 2,373 were unmarked. And there were around 42 mass graves also, which we identified. The State Human Rights Commission started investigating. They used our report as the prima facie evidence. They actually started visiting the different areas, and they visited only 38 graveyards out of the 62 which we visited. And they confirmed the presence of 2,730 bodies, and out of them 2,156 are unmarked. But 574 were identified as people who were locals, but they were buried as foreign militants by the state authorities, by the Indian Army and the Jammu and Kashmir police.
So, Khurram Parvez, until your investigation happened and the state verified it, the Indian government was claiming that the people buried in these graves were foreign militants.
Yes, the government said that these are all unmarked graves are of foreign militants, so people need not worry about them. There was intense repression from the state after we brought out our report. Then the State Human Rights Commission report, when it came out as an endorsement, as an acknowledgement of our allegations, then state had no answers, because it had said about us that we are propagandists, we are saying this to malign the image of the armed forces, cases were filed against us. But today we have been proven right. Also, the figures which are coming out from the State Human Rights Commission are on the higher end. Our figures were on the lower end. The State Human Rights Commission stopped its investigation after 38 graveyards because they said what was happening is that the figures were surpassing our figures, and they said that they would land into trouble, so therefore it's better to conclude this. But while as it was their responsibility to carry on this investigation beyond these three districts of North Kashmir.
I'm Tara Dorabji reporting from Srinagar, Kashmir for Pacifica Radio. And of the bodies that have been identified, how many of them are actually Kashmiri civilians?
We presented a case list of 53 exhumations where the state conducted the exhumations. Government had claimed earlier that these are foreign militants, all 53 of them. But when they were exhumed and DNA tests were carried on, 49 out of 53 were local civilians of Jammu and Kashmir. So that speaks for itself, who are being buried in these graves. And also, in Jammu and Kashmir, we have 8,000 people who, over the last 22 years, have disappeared. And many of them, there is evidence they were arrested by the Indian Army. So these people who disappeared were then found out in some of these graves. These other 8,000 people who were disappeared in Jammu and Kashmir, where are they? They might be in these graves. And also, it is the right of the family to have the body. Even if the person was a combatant, the government does not want to give these bodies to the family members because there is something to hide. They are hiding the marks of torture. They are hiding the custodial deaths of these people because many of these, even combatants who were arrested, were killed in custody. So if the government would have allowed these bodies to be given to the family members, then obviously a different truth would have emerged out. It would have been an embarrassment for India. Indian civil society legitimizes the violence used by the Indian state against the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And there's, of course, silence from the international community as well.
We're talking with Khurram Parvez about the dead speaking truth. They cannot be silenced. And I know that some of the research that you've been doing is also on torture that is happening, that you're documenting, going out to the villages, going out to the communities, talking with people, and you will be releasing a report in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about the torture that people here in Kashmir are enduring, not just over the last 20 years, but cases that are happening now?
The most underreported phenomenon in Jammu and Kashmir is torture. And the reason is, when people are tortured and released, they consider themselves to be lucky. We should thank God that we have been allowed to live. It is because of that fear that torture continues to remain an underreported phenomenon. Hundreds of people in every village have been tortured over the last 22 years. Not just men, but women, but children as well, old people as well. There would be people who would tell you how their private parts were electrocuted. We have more than 1,500 cases where people have turned impotent because of this kind of torture. Even in 2009, just recently, there were 11 boys who were forced to sodomize with each other in Srinagar city, in a police station. And this was filmed. And then in the court, when this case went, the police are providing this evidence that they were themselves willing to do this.
So it went to trial and...
Nothing happened in this. Nothing happened. There are thousands of cases where people were forced to sit on a burning stove. I recently documented a case where, I was myself horrified. I've documented very horrible cases, but this was the most horrible. In this case, this man who, back when he was arrested, he was tortured and he was kept in solitary confinement for 1 month. And he was not given anything to eat, but his flesh from his body was cut. And that was given to him regularly to eat. The war which has been declared on people of Jammu and Kashmir by the Indian state has been violent, has been brutal, and has matched all records of brutality around the world. Whatever we have suffered in last 20 years is no less than a war crime. Yet, there is silence from the international community because of the image of India, that it's the largest democracy. As if democracies don't commit crimes. Human rights are global responsibility.
And if people out there want more information, they want to support this struggle, what are some good websites?
Well, we have our website, the www.kashmirprocess.org. This is the website of International People's Tribunal. It does have a lot of documentation, and in future, most of our reports will be uploaded there. And then we have another website called jkccs.net.
jkccs.net, and the other one is
www.kashmirprocess.org.
Kashmir, can you hear me? Yeah. Put your hands together. Get ready for the struggle, ain't you? Everybody over here, renegade on the mic. It's the resistance anthem. The struggle. Yeah. Listen up.
You're tuned into Pacifica Radio. I'm Tara Dorabji in Srinagar, Kashmir. I'm joined with Tahira, mother of 3 boys. Sahil, age 12, is here to talk about the disappearance of his father, and Tahira, her husband's disappearance in 2002. In Kashmir, between 1989 and 2011, there have been more than 8,000 disappearances. Thank you so much for being with us. Tahira, can you tell us about when your husband disappeared?
निकले ना वो घर से मतलब गए वो अपने मजदूरी करने के लिए फिर उनका बाद में कोई अता पता नहीं चला.
He says her husband is going to Delhi and he does not come back at home. She is going jails and everyone person, but no.
And how long did you keep looking for him?
9 years.
And did anyone ever hear anything from him, any information on what happened?
No.
Nothing?
No, nothing.
Tahira, is this something that happens a lot to families in Kashmir?
उनको बोलो कि मतलब जितनी भी फैमिली है यहाँ पे मतलब तकरीबन 10,000 लोग.
She's saying he is not one people. Her husband is disappeared. There is 10,000 people is disappeared, and there's 1,500 people is half widows, and their families are so poor.
This is my first time in Kashmir, and the level of suffering and the occupation that the people are going through is so deep. And it seems like there is a untold suffering of the women. Tell us a little bit about how the women are suffering under occupation in Kashmir.
There is some peoples and some women and children. They have no clothes for making, and there is very problem. And yes, there is stone pelting and some problems are there. And I have no house, and she gave the medical depressions and many problems.
I'm Tara Dorabji. We are here speaking with Tahira. She's the wife whose husband disappeared in 2002. Her son Sahil is interpreting for her. Tahira, do you worry very much for your sons?
She does not protest for me and my family. She protests all other men and 10,000 men in Kashmir who have disappeared in Kashmir. She has to confirm that he is dead, and 10,000 men and their families are hugged at lifetime bonds. She told all the men, if he, for example, he go in the shop and he is dead, and I confirm that he is dead, but their men are not confirmed he is dead or living. I am dead at 10 times in a day. there is mass graves, and I confirm there is mass graves. They have to confirm her husband or any other person. They have to protest for his persons. And she told there is mass graves, and I hugged my husband.
Tahira, what is your hope for the people of Kashmir?
जो बोलो जितने भी लोग ये हैं मैं अपना नहीं ये बोलना पहले से
There is many people disappear, and she and other men protest for any other person don't disappear. My father is disappear, and her husband is disappear, and any other person has disappeared. She had feelings.
And are you hoping for the freedom of Kashmir? And what would that freedom be like?
She has a freedom for the people has disappeared. She told any other person don't disappear, and some people are killing, and they have somebody in jail.
We've been speaking with Tahira and Sahil in Srinagar, Kashmir. Do you have any last things you want to say?
And I have a problem. My father disappeared in December 2002. He was a labor. After his disappearance, my mother is facing many problems. She works in a knitting center. My father used to give me 5 rupees every day. Now no one gives. And I make the paper bags, me and my mother, at evening, and go to the shopkeeper, and shopkeeper buy these paper bags and give the 100 rupees, 50 rupees, 10 rupees.
Do you work, Sahil, after you go to school and then you come home and you work?
Yeah, at the evening.
You do your studies in the day and then work at night?
And my brother is in orphanage, and one brother is at home. He go to school, and I go to school. My mother is working, and my brother is in school. His father is come and give the result of his son, and my father does not come at my school. And you come, please, please, please.
And Sahil, you're 12 years old now and have been living under occupation your whole life. What are some of the hardest things as a young boy?
Yeah, I am a young boy, but I'm scared for police and armies. And if I am going to shopkeepers, there's police and I'm scared, armies. And the woman, any one woman, go at the evening shop, she's scared for police and armies.
What is your hope for the future of your people and your land?
I hope mass graves. Who is he?
You want the government to find out who's in the mass graves?
And they have to accept this. There is mass graves. Mm-hmm. And they do not work. Government do not work for this.
And are you hoping for the freedom, the independence of Kashmir?
Yeah, I have a hope. There is a freedom in Kashmir.
This is Tara Dorabji reporting from Srinagar, Kashmir. And that was the voice of Tahira and her son Sahil. October 19th. You are listening to a special on Pacifica Radio, Kashmir, the untold story of Indian occupation. I'm Tara Dorabji. Next, we are going to a piece of my conversation with Saida that I had in Srinagar, Kashmir. I visited her in a small one-room dwelling with little light. All 4 of her sons died as a result of the conflict. A local Kashmiri journalist interpreted for me. We are now going to go to our conversation with Saida in Srinagar, Kashmir, where she tells us when her first son was killed. October
1990, her first son was killed.
And how was he killed?
He says he must have been selling something on his, was hawking right outside, and there must have been a clash between armed militants and the government forces, and he was killed in the crossfire, according to her. And she says her son was taken away and he was prepared for burial, and then they got to know he was killed, and she went there to see him. Somewhere else. She did not, when the firing happened outside her house here, she did not know what had happened. She did not know her son was killed. She says when I noticed trouble outside, she went up and started calling her son to come in. And she says later I came to know that when I started calling him, he was already killed by then. And we were not allowed, she was not allowed to come out then by the government forces, and instead the government forces came in and broke doors and windows perhaps to check if there were people inside. Part of that door is still broken that we saw 20 years later. She says 3 of my sons just were killed one after another within 3 years, a year after each other. The second son was killed when they were being chased by the government forces, so they had no escape but to jump into the river, and some of them died. Her son was one of them. The body was fished out after 2 days, and then another year passes. In between, her third son, he had joined militants. She knew he had joined the militants, and he would come only once in a while secretly to see her. He was killed in a nearby area. She finally identified him in the police station and brought the body home and buried him the next day. So that is 3 sons in 3 years. He said, if I get some help, somebody helps me, I keep living. If that help stops, I'll just die inside unnoticed. It's not that, her sons died and they were compensated for. That could keep her going on. She said, none of that has happened. So now it's a situation, if the help that she gets stops, she'll simply quietly die inside her home.
You are listening to a special on Pacifica Radio, Kashmir, the untold story of Indian occupation. I'm Tara Dorabji. When I was in Kashmir in Srinagar in October, one evening I had the pleasure of meeting with an amazing young woman, Bilkis Manzoor. It was getting dark, so we were in a bit of a rush in our meeting. We wanted to make sure we weren't out on the streets too late after dark. Bilkis Manzoor became a member of the Association of the Parents of Disappeared Persons after her father disappeared in 2002. The army took him from their house in the middle of the night. They have not seen him since. Bilkis Manzoor continues to fight for justice for her father and brought his case all the way to India's Supreme Court. I met Bilkis by the poolside in a hotel. Unfortunately, there was tons of street noise, but I still want to share some of our conversation with you. We'll go to where Bilkis is telling us why she continues to fight for her father's case.
First of all, I am fighting for my father. That's my big thing. Yeah, I am also supporting to freedom because I make a victim and I want freedom. I'm not talking only for my father. I'm talking thousands of those persons who are disappeared by Indian forces. And my dream is to fight for other persons who is not eligible to fight their case, to lodge their cases. Because in Kashmir, a lot of women are afraid with my mom, and she is also following the case. We are two profiles. My mom is fighting for her husband, and I am fighting for my father.
And you took it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. And, being here in Kashmir, I've just been astounded at the level of militarization, oppression, systematic surveillance of the Kashmiri people. And one of the stories that seems to be largely untold is how the occupation of the Indian Army is affecting women. As a Kashmiri woman, how do you see this occupation?
Yeah, it's affecting. During these years, I saw many girls are raped by forces. But what happened, I don't think so anybody take serious action on it. In this way, women are suffering. That she is raped by the some women, not everyone, raped by the.
Have there been any convictions?
And another thing is, sorry?
Have there been any convictions of rape by the soldiers? Has there ever been a conviction of a soldier in the court system?
I think it's all the game of government to destroy Kashmir situation, but it's actually. And another thing is when a woman is working for his husband, his whereabouts, whether he is alive or. I saw many women in 2-3 women in JKCC in a member as a APDP was tortured by Indian army, and me was also threatened to calls that don't do this, otherwise you have to pay for this. But I don't afraid because I thought I am strong. I should fire this, and I never stop. I have threatened by they don't do any misbehave with me because I know how to handle these things. But I have threatened by calls, by other things. But it's a big effect on women by this, and so many things which I can't say because you have to prove for that.
Tuned into Pacifica Radio. I'm Tara Dorabji reporting from Srinagar, Kashmir, and I'm speaking with Parvaz Bukhari. He's an independent journalist based in Kashmir. Welcome to Pacifica Radio.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much for being with us. You know, you've been writing about Kashmir for many years and are now an independent journalist. What's one of the reasons that you decided to work as a freelance journalist?
Partly my experience with my employers, of whom there have been many. I didn't start off from Kashmir. I started reporting from all across India and some other foreign assignments. I returned to Kashmir in 2004 and I began realizing how much of editorial interference a reporter from here has to deal with. And when it was television, it was more pronounced. And when I started writing, for dailies and weeklies subsequently, I experienced more subtler editorial control. I would call it editorial impedance, and slowly began to understand that it was too tiring. I thought I was putting in more effort fighting the editorial impedance, as I call it, than concentrating on my work, and finally realized that perhaps it's time to break independent and start doing a little bit more in-depth work.
We're talking with Parvaz Bukhari. He's an independent journalist reporting on Kashmir from Srinagar. And, in the U.S., the debate, though rarely talked about, when it is talked about within Kashmir, it's largely framed as a conflict between India and Pakistan, India having control, and then the question of should it be with India or Pakistan. Can you talk to us a little bit about the independence movement in Kashmir, both the roots of it and putting it within the context of the partitioning of India?
It's really tragic that the Kashmir issue, as it is generally called in the subcontinent, the dispute of Kashmir, is still being looked at as something, a dispute between India and Pakistan. While as even before India and Pakistan became two independent nations around the time of partition, after the British colonialists left. So the independence movement here has its own history. It was going on alongside the Indian independence movement in a sense. But in 1947 marked an important departure from that. Kashmir suddenly started being seen as a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan. But the fact of the matter is that the Kashmiri independence movement has been indigenous. But there has been a very, very strong movement for independence from both India and Pakistan post-1947. And that is what has largely been ignored both by the two nation-states that formed around the 1940s as well as the international community. And what was seen as support for Pakistan or support for Kashmir's becoming a part of Pakistan, that in my estimation is slowly transformed and added to the sentiment for independence, for total liberation from both India and Pakistan.
You're tuned into Pacifica Radio. I'm Tara Dorabji in conversation with Parvaz Bukhari. He's an independent journalist. We are in Srinagar, Kashmir. In terms of really the occupation, you're talking about 20 years of a fierce occupation, and yet coming here to Kashmir, there's a very strong sense of cultural identity, community identity. And what do you think has enabled the Kashmiri people to keep their identity so strong under such a fierce occupation?
It depends how you look at it. The occupation is not just 20 years old. The extent of militarization dramatically increased since 1989 when Kashmiris picked up arms and rebelled against Indian rule in Kashmir. In the Kashmiri psyche, the occupation is a few hundred years old. The occupation began when the British sold Kashmir for 75 lakh rupees. So the sense of occupation has been there for many, many decades. And there's a very strong sense of that identity. And today, the Kashmiris, if they're fighting for anything, that is to retain that identity more than anything else in terms of, how we see nation states operating.
We're talking with Parvaz Bukhari. He's an independent journalist here in Srinagar, Kashmir. I'm Tara Dorabji, and you are listening to Pacifica Radio as we discuss the long history of Kashmir and the quest and struggle towards and for independence. Do you think, when you're talking about the shift in trust between Kashmir and mainland India and the government, do you think that one of the things that caused India to clamp down more on Kashmir and strip it of its independent status was the extremely sort of progressive, revolutionary ideas and actions happening in Kashmir?
It could be partly that. I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of how Delhi must have felt about, that time. But it's a fact when Kashmir got its first opportunity to independently handle its future, make decisions about the future of a people, some really amazing and beautiful things happened. You don't see examples of that perhaps in the entire South Asian region. For example, the land reforms. This is perhaps the only place in this entire South Asian region where land reforms were not just announced as a policy but were also implemented on the ground, and that served Kashmiri people very, very well. And I believe if Kashmiri people have been able to put up the kind of struggle to retain their rights and their identity, it can partly be also attributed to the fact that there was a certain decent amount of equitable distribution of resources in Kashmir, and that does empower a people and democratize India.
We're talking with Parvaz Bukhari. He's an independent journalist here in Kashmir. I'm Tara Dorabji, and you are listening to Pacifica Radio, a report from Srinagar, Kashmir. And Parvaz, in your conversations with me, you've described the Indian operation in Kashmir as the most sophisticated occupation regime in the world. Can you explain to our listeners the intensity of the occupation here?
This is about 1.2 million people, and you have the presence of anything between, if you go by the official estimates, 600,000 to 700,000 troops occupying this place. So that's the physical aspect of it.
It's the most densely militarized land on Earth.
It's the most densely militarized place on Earth, and what that means, what it means for a people to be living under such intense military gaze. What that produces is forces that I think are directed at atomizing a society, not just atomizing it, but also put it under such extreme surveillance that kind of social, trust, that bond that makes a society, that makes a family, for example, it starts disintegrating. So that this situation has continued for a very, very long time, and it intensified since 1990 a great deal.
As a reporter, do you feel targeted for what you report and how you report?
It's a very difficult, subtle question. Targeted, I will say yes, in a 1,000 ways. It's one thing to be hit on the streets at a time of tensions by the paramilitary or the police or the army and abused. It is another thing to know that you're being monitored all the time. Maybe your phone's being listened to, your conversations, private and professional, are being listened to and recorded. And
how obvious is the surveillance?
In certain ways, it's very obvious. In many other ways, it's very subtle. It's produced a situation where members of the community have been forced to report on each other within families, within business groups, within groups of journalists, and bribe has been used as an instrument of heightening that surveillance. So in that sense, you feel targeted all the time. Not just targeted, you feel choked. You have to be looking back at your shoulder all the time.
We're talking with Parvez Bukhari. He's an independent journalist here in Srinagar, Kashmir. I'm Tara Dorabji, and you're listening to Pacifica Radio. And Parvez Bukhari, why do you do what you do? Why do you continue to report the truth?
Because there's a huge gulf between what the truth is and how it is represented outside and how it appears to people outside this place. As long as there's that gap, and I think it always will be, I'll be inspired to write about what I understand is the truth.
Parvez, I've only been in Kashmir 4 days now, but the absolute emotional intensity of the surveillance, of the militarized streets, and then sitting down with the Kashmiris and hearing the stories of occupation, the stories of rape, the stories of murder, the stories of disappearance, it rocks you to the core. How do you handle that, both in your daily existence and then as a journalist going in? I'm sure that you have covered stories right after people have been murdered, talked to the victims. How do you handle that?
It's very tiring. It's extremely exhausting. I don't know, sometimes I surprise myself, where does one finally, get that energy, that emotional energy from? It's very, very difficult, to report your own conflict. It needs not just a very, very strong professional commitment, but also needs huge reservoirs of personal emotional energy. I sometimes think, it's coming across and having to report so much of brutality and gore and difficulties of a brutal occupation takes away something from you. It hardens your heart slowly. But there are times when you suddenly find moments of catharsis. I can relate one experience to you. There was a film made by filmmaker Sanjay Kak. It was perhaps the first long documentary film about what's been happening in Kashmir for the last 20 years, made very, very honestly. When the filmmaker came to screen the film in Srinagar, I had seen the film when it was screened earlier. I had seen the film several times. But when I saw it in Kashmir, and when I was part of a Kashmiri audience there, I realized in the process of working and reporting the horrors of this place, how much you have kept burying inside you, and which needed excavation to be able to do more, to be able to continue to live as humanly as possible. It was then that I realized, that while you're working and allowing yourself to be desensitized and brutalized in the process, you also need to be simultaneously creating opportunities of catharsis for yourself. And even that is very, very tiring. In the end, living here, not just working here or reporting this place, is extremely, extremely exhausting and tiring. This place is really, really very tiring. The amount of information that you need to process every day to be able to be sure that you're okay is just amazing.
That was the voice of Parvez Bukhari. He's an independent journalist here in Kashmir. And I think in our last few minutes, my question to you is, what do you think is the greatest untold story that's waiting to be told in Kashmir?
I think Kashmir itself is an untold story. Trust me, I personally do believe that it's an untold story. Given what's been happening here, I think it'll take a very, very long time for that story to be told in a substantial measure. The untold story is what has happened to individuals, what has happened to women, what has happened to children, what has happened to businesses, what has happened to families, what has happened to our education, what has happened to the idea of who we are and who we want to be. All of that is an untold story. For me, Kashmir is still an untold story, and for me, at the pace at which things are finally, beginning to come out in terms of narratives, it'll take 100 more years to say the Kashmir story.
100 more years. Well, we're starting today with Parvez Bukhari, breaking the truth, keeping it alive from the silence of the occupied Kashmir Valley. Thank you so much for joining us on Pacifica Radio.
Thank you for talking to me, Tara.
Thank you so much. I'm Tara Dorabji, reporting from Srinagar, Kashmir, the most densely militarized land on earth. Tara Dorabji, reporting for Pacifica Radio from Srinagar, Kashmir. I'm speaking with Khurram Parvez. He's a freedom fighter on the front lines, human rights, tireless, struggling here in Kashmir, in Srinagar, in the world's most densely militarized land. And, you really grew up in a state of occupation, under siege, seeing, witnessing the land transform, covered with graveyards. How did you get started in this work?
In 1990, when I was just 14 years old, my maternal grandfather was part of a protest demonstration. There were 10,000 people. They were protesting against the molestation of women in the old city area of Srinagar. There was an unwarranted and disproportionate use of violence, direct firing on the people. One of the first massacres of 1990, in which 52 people were killed. My grandfather was also one of them. The person who had ordered the firing was my next door neighbor, and I had to live with it, that he was there, and I was a student of 7th standard. I grew up thinking of revenge. I grew up thinking of this injustice, because my grandfather was very close to me. He was someone who had taught me why justice is important, why we should be always thinking of being just ourselves. His words would always remind me of what my revenge should be. Other young Kashmiris of my generation became militants. I could have also become militant. But I think my grandfather's teachings provoked me to think more in terms of achieving justice and speaking truth. In this culture of impunity, becoming violent is very easier. But speaking truth is difficult. We may not be able to change much today, but we will set an example for our future generations. What Kashmiri people have faced in last 22 years is a full-blown war. And the resilience of people of Jammu and Kashmir is admirable, is something which is worth sharing with the world. We have refused to agree to an indignified life.
I'm Tara Dorabji for Pacifica Radio in Srinagar, speaking with Khurram Parvez, freedom fighter, truth teller, here in the most densely militarized land on earth, continuing the struggle, keeping the stories alive alive. And, as the independence movement really grows and popularity and is gaining tremendous strength right now in Kashmir, one of the big questions is, what does that independence look like? And I know that coming out of Kashmir in this painful, long, one of the most brutal occupations in the story of the world, a beautiful new vision is being birthed. And really pushing beyond the nation state, pushing beyond the underpinnings of the neoliberal facets of capitalism.
Living in Kashmir from last 20 years, the kind of occupation which we have seen from the Indian government is very ruthless. We have more than 600,000 soldiers.
And what's the population? 600,000 soldiers to what? Civilian population?
To a population of 12 million people. In Iraq, when there was a full-blown war going on, the number of soldiers operating on behalf of the Allied forces was only 170,000. In Afghanistan, where there is a very open, clear war, and Afghanistan is a very big country as compared to Kashmir, the number of NATO forces is just 190,000. So one of the future visions for Jammu and Kashmir is that we do not want militarization at this place, because we will not be able to defend ourselves against these nuclear giants, India, Pakistan and China. So we will have to evolve other means to protect ourselves. So that's one. But then also when we think of a future Kashmir, we cannot repeat the mistakes of other countries. What has happened in India, what has happened in Pakistan, what has happened in Bangladesh, what has happened in many other countries around the world. These people who fought for independence against the monsters became monsters themselves. Kashmir tomorrow has to be a place where absolute democracy is practiced, and democracy is part of our faith, is not just a mere slogan. We would want to be a country which practices democracy, which practices humanitarian values at the grassroots level.
Tell us a little bit about the summer uprisings. How long were they? How many people?
The 2008 and 2010 summer uprisings were huge. The number of people was 1 million, and at some days it was more than 1.5 million people participating in a huge protest rally. More than 142 civilians were killed last year, and 120 out of them were killed in protest demonstrations. And this was the response of the Indian state. And according to the government, more than 5,000 people were arrested, and 90% out of them were tortured as well. But despite all that, for 4.5 months, the protests continued. This struggle against Indian hegemony, against Indian brutality, has to be ethical. Resistance can never be unethical. And that gives me hope that future of Jammu and Kashmir is not dark. This conflict has made us understand many, many dark sides of militarism, many dark sides of racism, because we have faced racism from the Indian state so brutally.
I'm Tara Dorabji for Pacifica Radio in conversation with Goram Parvez, freedom fighter, truth teller. And in our final minutes, you've grown up in this very brutal, oppressed environment. And one of the things that struck me about you is you have a very great sense of humor, a lot of light that you carry with you in your interactions with people, and a certain hope and optimism that shines through. How do you feed this part of yourself?
We have seen suffering very closely. I have seen suffering very closely. My very close relatives, friends have died. One of the things which became a driving force for me is the trust which people have reposed in me. I cannot think of betraying them. But then our resistance has to be creative. And if we survive with, of course, hope, I think the future holds a lot of good things for us. We are hopeful of success. And one of the hopes for success is the tremendous courage which people have shown. People sometimes tell us that human rights activists are courageous. True, because we actually invite troubles. I mean, we are so stupid people everywhere in the world that we know the consequences of whatever is going to happen. But despite all that, we embrace problems. In 2004, my car was attacked, and my colleague Asya Jalani, she was killed, and my driver was killed. on the spot. And I was also injured. I was hospitalized for 45 days and I lost my right leg. It was amputated. I remember when it happened, I was asked by one of my very close friends. He said that, did we not tell you every time that these would be the consequences? And I smiled at him and I said that, did I not ever knew myself that this would happen? I was sure that something would happen, but I'm thankful to God that it's only one leg which has gone. I still have 2 more arms and I still have my leg with which I can continue to do what I have to do. We don't have many choices here in Jammu and Kashmir. The only choice which we have is to live. And we cannot live without the struggle for dignity. We cannot live without the struggle for freedom. And I think this is the best I could do with my life.
And if people out there want more information, they want to support this struggle, what are some good websites?
Well, we have our website, the www.kashmirprocess.org, and then we have another website called jkccs.net.
jkccs.net, and the other one is
www.kashmirprocess.org.
That was the voice of Khurram Parvez. I'm Tara Dorabji for Pacifica Radio. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
We'll continue to follow this story, your work, and your existence of resistance.
Thank you very much.
For KPFA Radio Pacifica, Tara Dorabji, Srinagar, Kashmir. Kashmir, the Untold Story of Indian Occupation was produced by myself, Tara Dorabji, Adrian Lobby, Laura Dean, Anthony Fest, Miguel Falcon Molina, Pedro Reyes, and Preeti Shakar. Jax is at the controls with technical support from Michael Yoshida, navigating us through all kinds of technical failures this morning. Special thanks to Jaz Hussain, Parvaz Bukhari, Khurram Parvez, Angana Chanerjee, Sanjay Kak, Zareen Dorabji, Kali, and Ishel. Today is my last morning hosting on the Monday Morning Mix. I'm being rotated off as a host. It has been an honor to have shared these sound waves with all of you over the last year. I'll be back at KPFA in the next few months, cruising with Londa Bajita on Friday nights. If you have any feedback for me or just want to follow my work, hit me up at tara@kpfa.org. In some form or another, I'll be in the mix. Until we meet again, thanks for tuning in.